And you mentioned one other thing too about the seller financing, about other tenants in the building. This is another opportunity that a lot of people will capitalize on. They'll get a space larger than they need, and they'll bring in other businesses to pay. They become the landlord to the other businesses. And so those other businesses are paying some of the freight on the building.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Today we have Paul Neal on the podcast. We're going to get into real estate. Should you, as a practice owner, just continue to renew or maintain your lease agreement? What are the pros and cons of buying real estate? In the pre-interview, we didn't even touch, by the way, on interest rates and all that. Paul Neal is an author, a professional, and we're going to get into how they also help on the front end of consulting and then also on the back end with financing and capital and connecting practice owners like all of you watching or listening to potential capital sources and lenders that specialize in this intersection of buying real estate. There's a bunch of pros and cons we're going to get into. And I kind of said to Paul in the pre-interview that practice owners are dealing with low reimbursement, low profit margins, competition, corporates and strategics coming in and buying the competition and having, strength in numbers right down the street or across the street. And I think that I kind of said, I think this would be a distraction and cost money and all that for a practice owner to buy the real estate. And then also these corporates or these buyers, even like us, we don't want to buy the real estate. We want to buy the practice, the book of business, the therapist, the culture, the morale, all of that. But Paul says I'm wrong. We're going to get into all of that. Paul, welcome on the show.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me. Excited about this.
All right, I know that was a lot. I'll just give the audience a brief bio, a brief intro of yourself, why you're here, and then we're going to get into the real estate and all that with who you help in healthcare, real estates versus leases, leasehold, all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just 30,000 foot view. I'm an entrepreneur, business owner by heart. I've had 6 in my career. I started my first one when I was in college and been in the real estate finance world since 1998. Did my first real estate transaction. And so I've seen a lot. And where we really focus today, the area that we see is an area of great need is this idea of, what do I do with the space that I operate my business out of? I've noticed over my career of 30 plus years with entrepreneurs and business owners, there's basically 2 camps. There's the one I'm going to lease over time and build my business and just focus on that, which is fine if that's your mission. But then there's this other camp that somewhere along the way made the decision they're going to buy the real estate that they run their business out of. And that camp tends in the long run to have a better net worth situation, generally speaking, because they have this real estate that's created tremendous value as an add-on to the business and their life over time. And so that's been my mission, to help entrepreneurs see that opportunity when it makes sense. It doesn't make sense for every business. It doesn't make sense at all the time. But when it does make sense, the limitations that most people run into, the resistance as a business owner, is really ignorance. Because to your point of us talking early, most business owners are heads down, working in the business, growing it. How do we get to the next level? How do we grow revenue, cut expenses, put systems in and all that, and then replicate and scale? They're not focused on the financial world, which is a moving target. It's fluid, changes every day. And most people have never bought commercial real estate. They bought a house to live in, maybe a second or third home, maybe some investment, residential real estate. Completely different animal, completely different world. But it's funny because I have people come to me all the time, business owners that want to go buy investment like residential real estate, and they're happy to plunk 20, 25% down and sometimes 30 to make cash work. And they're renting their space. And I'm like, dude, you can get into your own building for 0% down and you'd be your own tenant, And so it's like, and they're like, what? Didn't even know that. So that's sort of some background and some backstory.
Awesome. And then how about just kind of intro the book? That was one thing when you, I get these podcast folks, these agencies reaching out, and they luckily found me and they connected you and I. And that was the one thing that caught my eye with your bio and the one pager about the book that you've written and published. And obviously it talks specifically about this topic.
Yeah. I wrote a book called Un-Lease Your Business, how to unlock wealth, autonomy, and control by buying your building and firing your landlord. And really, the book is sort of a genesis of my experiences and observations, I didn't know of any resource out there that someone could go to and get some answers at a high level to understand, this idea of buying the building, what's involved, the benefits, the drawbacks, the options, the process, what to experience, and do it on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee, in less than 2 hours. Because business owners are super busy. None of us want to read Moby Dick, to try to understand something. You don't want to do that. You're reading enough business books as it is, right? And so to me, it's a short compendium to say, okay, here's your overview, your 30,000 foot view. And literally in, less than a couple hours on a Saturday, you can get a pretty good idea of the market. And so that was the idea and the genesis behind it and why I wrote it.
Got it. Awesome. So I didn't even mention, by the way, in the pre-interview, the interest rates. Is that even a factor right now? Because I was kind of saying, okay, I presented to you. I said, all right, Paul, there's I could see the book and the angle and your value. I understand it. The worst case scenario would be a practice owner watching or listening, and they're in the last year of their lease or something, and they're going to get phased out. The landlord is hey, we got some gigantic anchor tenant, or we're going to demolish it and we're going to build a high rise or whatever. Things happen, right? Things happen in commercial real estate all the time. So there's the danger of that happening, where then they have to relocate, which then it suggests your route would be kind of the saving grace, because if you own the real estate, then you're never going to get pushed out. You're never going to be beholden to a lease or some other landlord ever again. But then it's kind of that intersection of but then it's time and effort, but then you kind of push back. You're hey, we provide the assistance so that the practice owners can stay focused on their practice, on their business, because they're not specialized in this. We want to have patients come to us for physical therapy treatment because we believe we're the specialists. So it's almost we don't want my colleagues to then go and do this real estate buying on their own unless they have some specialist like you in their corner.
Yeah. So to your point, the non-renewal of the lease, just jumping in there right away with the 1 year heads up notice, is not the way it happens, by the way. It's 30 days out when you go to renew. That's when they tell you, oh, by the way, we're not renewing your lease.
Way worse.
It's way worse. In our experience, I get the calls, got one last week, all the time. We had a guy that had a pizza business, and he had 8 years in a location, put $80,000 in the kitchen, customizing it, somebody else's location, of course. And they just knocked on the door one day and said, hey, we're selling the building. You got 30 days. And what do? You got your local clients there, your patients, if you're in practice of some type. Now you have to find a place, relocate, in his case, build a kitchen, and hopefully that he doesn't lose, more than 20-30% of his business after 8 years. And anyway, we were helping to buy the building, but it's not always that opportunity. It can be too late. As far as time and effort and focus, if you're a business owner at all, Dan Sullivan says it best in his book, it's who, not how. If you're trying to figure out everything on your own, to do everything on your own, then your average dollar cost, your dollar cost earnings, of your time is going to be really low, because there's a lot of things that you could probably learn to do just about anything, right? But, hopefully you're not building a business and cutting your grass, or building a business and, washing your car, unless it's just therapy for you, right? But because you can hire somebody to do that and use that hour and a half of cutting the grass and cleaning up to think about your business, or spend some time with your family, or do something that's going to allow you to be more productive. Same thing here. I've got a section in the book about the DIY. You can read the book and go execute the process. I tell you how to do it and whatnot. The problem is it is a tremendous distraction to try to figure it out. You got to understand capital markets. You got to understand the real estate market. You got to understand contracts and covenants and what you might run into. And then interest rates. Today, gosh, we see interest rates anywhere from, in the mid to high sixes to 11.5%. So, how do you know you're getting the best deal? 7.5 might be a great deal for you, but it might not be a great deal for you. You could get a 5-year term with a balloon. That might be a great deal, or maybe a 25-year fixed rate might be a great deal, but you don't know. And there's really nowhere to get the answers directly, because the commercial world is completely different than residential. So when you go buy your house to live in, or your investment property or whatever, most of that stuff is really regulated by the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, these quasi governmental agencies that basically write the rules for all residential real estate in the United States. When you get in the jumbo land, it's similar. It's a little different, but pretty similar. But in essence, most lenders are just following all the same rules. The rates are going to change, be a little variance, and the fees will be a little variance, but essentially it's the same stuff. So pretty simple, pretty boilerplate. Not the case in commercial. I say there's 5 ways you can buy commercial real estate. You could pay cash, which we don't recommend. Seller financing is an option and can be one of the best strategies if you're able to negotiate that. Conventional, you walk into the bank that you've got a relationship with, and some people do that. Most people get really disillusioned when they do that, when they find out they need 20-25% down, and their banker that they've developed this relationship with, because they've had their depository accounts with them for so long. If they're lucky enough to have a local bank, not some monolithic national company that doesn't know you at all, you come to find out that they don't really want to loan you a large sum of money. They just want your deposits the hard way. I think they approve like 25% of applications. Private money, there's insurance companies lend money, venture capital, hedge funds, just private sort of consortiums, family offices, things like that loan money. And then you have SBA guaranteed loans, which SBA doesn't loan the money, but they'll guarantee other funding sources, whether it's bank, private investors, or whatever. And they have a couple of programs. They've got a 7A and a 504 that both have sort of pluses and minuses based upon your situation. So there's a lot of options and confusion and misinformation out there. And if you try to run that down, you're going to be distracted, and you probably won't end up where you want to end up at the end of the day. You might be able to get a loan, you might be able to get the building, but it might not be the best use of your time. And so again, to your point, what we do and other people like us is we're that consultancy, for lack of a better term, where we're gonna ask the hard questions. We're gonna deep dive into your financials. We're gonna find out where you are today, business-wise, where you expect to be in 3 to 5 to 10 years, what your strategy and goals are. And if you have skeletons in the closet, we're gonna find them. We're gonna ask about it, because if you've got them, we can deal with them 95% of the time. And as long as we know about it up front, we can mitigate it. And again, here's another mistake people do. They walk into the bank and they're not represented. They don't understand this. And that skeleton pops out of the closet about 2 weeks before closing and blows the deal up. So because they don't want to find out about that at the end, they want to know up front and underwrite that way. Very, very sensitive to that. So, but we do it in a way that doesn't take away from your primary business. Like we'll get your permission, engage with your CPA. We'll engage with your attorney if you have an attorney. And it doesn't take a lot of your time. That's where we like to focus and then analyze and sit down and say, okay, hey, Dave, we got an hour. Here's where we are, question, answer. But then, of course, we're available anytime you have a question.
For sure. And we've covered a little bit of seller finance in the past, but just to clarify that, if anyone's watching or listening, let's say I had a physical therapy brick and mortar office in your building, and it was there's 3 or 4 or 5 other tenants, right? And if I, the physical therapy business owner, wanted to buy your building, Paul, and if we agreed to, now you said it's seller finance, are you saying 100% seller finance or some component of seller finance?
Yeah, either or. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in best case scenario, I'm the therapy owner. I want to buy the whole building. Mm-hmm. And let's say you're a mensch. You're just you agree to 100% seller finance, just so everyone understands what that could be or what that is, would be, we figure out obviously closing costs or whatever, but basically the rent and the cash flow of the real estate, I'm paying you over whatever, and we agree to it up front, monthly or quarterly or whatever payments, typically monthly. I'm going to pay you a monthly fixed fee moving forward for X amount of months until I pay off the full dollar amount. Let's say, I don't know, $3 million building. And we agree to some monthly payment over time. And it's going to come from the cash flow of all the other tenants, myself as the tenant. And potentially I can get into that building as the new owner without even a loan or coming out of pocket. Is that kind of a rough way to describe 100% seller finance?
Yeah. Basically the owner just says, yeah, you write a note between you and the owner and you make payments to them, and it's like they become the lender as well as the previous owner, right? And so those terms are very fluid and they can be negotiated. And you'll have a lot of people that are, the graying of America. They've had this building for a number of years, or maybe they've passed it on to an heir, and the children don't really want to deal with being landlords because for whatever reason, but they would love to have a stream of cash flow from it. Maybe they don't even want a large lump sum for the sale of the property, like almost an annuitized payment over time. Some people, particularly the old ones. Yeah, the older people really, really like that idea. So, and then if you ever default on it, they've got the asset, right? So
take it back.
Yeah, so it's really a great deal, and a lot of sellers, based on where they are in life, becomes a great option for them. I'll give you an example. So in the medical field, I have a client, a friend, Kathy. She's an OBGYN, and she bought her building about 15 years ago, and in the Virginia area, the Hampton, Virginia area, and paid it off in about 12 years. And she's approaching retirement, and she had one of these larger practices come in and buy her practice, kind of like what you're doing with other physical therapy. She was an OBGYN. She negotiated the sale of the practice and terms to work there for another 3 or 4 years because she's not quite ready to retire. So a nice salary there. And oh, by the way, all the patients and staff have been coming to this location, this building. And so the new owners don't want to move the practice. They just want to take over the practice. And so she negotiated a sweet deal where they're paying her rent on the building. It's a nice 5-figure sum of rent every single month. The building's paid for, 12 years into it. And so now she got a big payout. She's got salary, and she's got this retirement stream outside of whatever else she did for retirement just by having the building. And what I tell people is, if it makes sense, then 10, 12, 15 years is going to pass one way or another. And so if it makes sense, you should really consider it, because you're going to pay somebody for 10, 15, 20 years, whether it's paying yourself or paying a landlord. And you talked about locking in, you're locking in your debt payment. You lock in if you buy $1 million, $2 million building today. Well, we know it's going to appreciate over time. We don't know in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. Nobody knows the short run. But historically, if we look 5, 10, 20 years downstream, it's going to be worth more than it is today, right? Not to mention the fact that you're paying on every payment you make is some equities. You're paying down some principal balance. And so you're building this asset. And honestly, once most people, Dave, get in it and get 12, 24 months in the process, it's a distant thought in the memory. They're back. I mean, they're in their groove, just doing their thing, and it's just adding up and adding up and adding up. Not that much different from when you buy your personal house. A little bit of a struggle to get in the first time. Once you're in, you start making payment. You don't think about it a lot, but man, your house is appreciating. And then 5 years from now, your family's bigger. You want to move. You're making some more money. You get a nicer home, and all of a sudden, you got all this equity in there. You can either take the equity to roll it to the next house, or you could maybe put a renter in your other house and have that. And you mentioned one other thing too about the seller financing, about other tenants in the building. This is another opportunity that a lot of people will capitalize on. They'll get a space larger than they need, and they'll bring in other businesses to pay. They become the landlord to the other businesses. And so those other businesses are paying some of the freight on the building. We just literally closed on a 12,000 square foot warehouse, flex warehouse, for a high-end home remodeler. And he's taken 8,000 feet, and the other 4,000, he's divided in 2 bays. And he's already, they haven't broken ground on the construction yet, but the 2 bays are already pre-leased. And the lease terms he got with the market rent, that's going to pay almost the entire mortgage on the new building as it stands today. And as his business grows, he can either find a second location, or he can not renew one of the leases of the other tenants and expand into that space and then do it again if he chooses to. So there's some flexibility and opportunity there.
Now, in that example, do you and your team, do you guys help with writing those lease contracts as well? I know that's usually also more on the attorney side of things and the legal side, but do you guys help with that, or is that totally not your area of expertise?
We don't write the leases, but if they don't have a good commercial real estate agent who would handle the actual acquisition of the land and the construction and work with our team, they're generally the ones that would write leases and that sort of thing. And if not, the attorneys can do it. And we have some referrals.
Got it. Now, you gave some other financing options, right? So you said SBA, you said some other conventional loans, some, traditional banks that maybe they're not even doing SBA loans at all. I know from the acquisition side, I think it's like SBA 7A, the 7A loan program, which is more for, so it's not acquisition of real estate, it's the business acquisition side. Very similar. That is definitely a personal guarantee for anyone that's 20% or more on the newly acquired business or whatever it is.
Yes.
I'm assuming so in that example, like I'm buying your building, even regardless. Now, let's say instead of the seller finance, now it's through SBA. If I'm over 20%, or is there some threshold? Like most likely I'm going to have to give a PG, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're 20% or greater, then yeah, we'll call you a player. You're a player in the transaction. Then yeah, you're gonna have to personally guarantee. Just about every loan type you're gonna find when you're talking owner occupied commercial is gonna require a guarantee for somebody that's got that much ownership. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that SBA on the 7A program, you can buy real estate with 7A. In fact, a lot of it's purchased with the 7A. It's a very flexible program. You can structure that loan to not only acquire the real estate, but also add working capital and do improvements and all into one loan. And whereas on an acquisition loan, that's generally a 10-year amortization. If your real estate's involved, it can go out to 25 years, which helps in cash flow quite a bit. Now, the 7A, though, will require, if based on the amount of collateral in the loan, they will require you to also potentially guarantee your house, pledge your house. So they'll put a lien on your personal residence if you have equity there. SBA has another program though called the 504, which doesn't require that at all. It doesn't. There is no guarantee on your personal residence or whatnot. So these are important things to know. Particularly if you're married, and you're like, oh, by the way, honey, she finds out at closing that they're pledging the house. Not a good time to find out. So you have to understand the landmines in the process. A lot of the banking terms too, if you go to your local bank, they're going to build in covenants. And I mean, it's 18 pages of fine print, but in there, they like to stick in there these covenants that basically say, hey, your business has to perform to a certain level, or your loan is technically in default, regardless of whether you're making your payments on time. So you have to be really careful about just, jumping eyes shut into the deep end. You need to know what you're signing up for. And sometimes it's fine. It makes sense. It's no big deal, but you need to know before you go, so to speak. And so they're all different. And that's why I think, if you're going to buy, here's the thing, if you're going to buy $1 million, $2 million, $3 million building, that's going to appreciate substantially over time. It's a big commitment. This is not a light decision. You don't jump into this if you're going to be in and out in 2 or 3 years. Your business has to be, stable, solid. You've got to have 3, 4, 5 years under your belt in a positive trajectory. And, it has to be well thought out. And so that's why we exist to basically help you think it out. And sometimes we'll say it's probably not a good idea for you, And interest, you talk about interest rates do matter. I mean, sometimes it's maybe not the right time to buy because of where interest rates are. On the flip side, it could be an opportunity because people aren't going into the market. If you believe interest rates are coming down, you can get in and float the interest rate down as time goes on. So there's different strategies, and again, it's really dependent on where you are, where you're trying to go, your market, because that's the other thing. Real estate is very local. Real estate is local, right? Your real estate in New York is completely different than Virginia, completely different than Florida. And even within each of these states, there are different pockets of it. So that's a critical consideration as well. If you're living in an area, or your practice is in an area that's economically sort of going down and people are fleeing, it's probably not a good idea to buy real estate. On the flip side, if you're in one of these areas where people are coming into for various and sundry reasons, it might not be a bad idea to consider if you can pull it off. And then your biggest challenge might be finding space, because supply issues are just like on residential, or supply is tight on commercial in a lot of places. Not the tall Class A, downtown monolithic buildings that everyone was fleeing from during COVID. they've got their own issues. They're, that's Class A space is whatever. But really the smaller, the retail-ish type locations, the flex warehouse space, the outdoors type stuff, people want to go see people. They want to be with people. They want to do that sort of thing. That stuff's in really high demand. And so you might have to build something. And so now you're looking at, 18 months out, you've got to be sort of strategic about, where we are. So again, jumping ahead a little bit from a process standpoint, this is not a whim on a Saturday, like I want to go buy a new home, honey. And you go out with a realtor that weekend and find one to put an offer in and you're closing in 30 days. From the time you get your financial house in order and you find a property, put a contract in, it's probably a 60 to 90 day process to close. So you can't jump into this 30 days before your lease runs out. And again, if you're thinking maybe you might need to build something, it's probably 18 months out because it's going to take 12 months probably to build. And you've got to find land and acquire land, maybe 2 years. So just some considerations.
Yeah, that's right. Really awesome. Let's say, so you gave the example of like the first transaction, depending on the situation, like the bank or the SBA or whoever, like it's going to be a personal guarantee. And then it may also be a lien against that individual's home. Mm-hmm. Let's say they work with you and then they want to buy, maybe, or they have 2 or 3 or 4 locations and they're leaseholders of all of them, or they bought the first one. They come back to you guys. They're like, hey, we want to have this roadmap where we try to buy the real estate of the second location and the third location, onward. Do they have to sign like, depending on the financial institution, like they have to sign a PG, a personal guarantee for each of those? Or at some point, like, can the second or third be like, is there enough collateral with the first real estate, or maybe like the practice or the business or something that is actually on the hook for the second or third location? Maybe it's a little nuance of a question, but it's like, how many transactions can someone be on the hook for? And then like, they're basically in debt more and more and more. I mean, they have cash flowing businesses and cash flowing real estate, but how would that potentially look like for like a multi-practice owner?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a corporate guarantee. Theoretically, yeah, you could get there with enough collateral and a cross collateralization, that sort of thing, and depending on which investors you went with and so forth. So it's possible. It's hard to sort of nail down a number on that. It's not going to be your first one and probably not your second one, to be honest with you. Now, if you're doing just like a pure investor play, like you're buying an investment commercial property, not for your business to be in, but we're not looking at the cash flow of your business. We're just looking at the tenant makeup, the cash flow of the property, and that sort of thing, which certainly requires more down payment, that sort of thing. Those we can do without a personal guarantee all day long, which is interesting. But you're not going SBA or anything like that. They won't do that. It's going to be different sources of money for that.
Got it. From your book or just your company, like, did we miss any big areas? Like, I try to give as much examples. You gave a lot of tactical areas of this, and there's a lot of, like you said, there's some nuance, but then there's some really obvious ways that, like, a company like you guys can help, and how you help practice owners out there. Anything that we skipped that we've maybe overlooked or like we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I'd say, one area is the tax advantages of it. And I'm not a CPA, you have to consult your tax advisor, but there's some opportunities there that I've seen people utilize in different ways. One would be a 1031 exchange. So if they start in a smaller building and they want to go to a larger one, they can take the equity in that and sell it and then roll it into a larger building. I had a couple of clients that owned a series of car washes like that. They started right out of school, bought some really kind of small rinky-dink car washes, sold them 1031 to all the money. And they did that over a couple of years to buy these much larger, much nicer facilities, with the idea really of the car wash just paying the freight, give them a basic standard of living, but the real estate going in value. They were able to sell that and basically divert all that taxable gain until they sold it for a large eight-figure sum, and then even took some of the proceeds from that and rolled it into other like investment real estate that they bought that they didn't run their companies in. And these guys are young. And so that's the 1031's an example of that. The other thing that I see people do is as the equity position in the building grows, now you have this piece of equity you can borrow against to use to maybe acquire other businesses, competitors, or other buildings. And since you're borrowing the money out of your business, it's not a taxable event. So there's advantages there as well. You're going to structure it in a way where you have a real estate holding company that you own and your operating company that's separate. Your operating company is going to pay rent to your real estate company, and you're going to have a market rent here, and you're going to increase it every year with like a lease, just like you would do if you had another tenant. But yeah, you've got a fixed rate mortgage over here. You're going to depreciate the building down, and so you're going to defer some of your taxable income that way. And that sort of thing adds up over time. So those are some things that you do on the tax side. The efficiency thing may not apply as much to you guys, but we get some businesses like I have a friend that is actually a commercial builder, but he had a half interest in a cabinet shop, and bought his partner out after about 10 years, was not involved at all. But he went in, and since he had owned the building, he went in and hired one of these Six Sigma managers to come in who didn't know cabinets, but knew management and process and systems and all that. And they basically gutted the building and retooled it. And end of the story was, because he owned the building, he could do it. He was willing to invest the money in the building, didn't have to ask permission. They literally doubled their output with the same staff after this renovation. And so you can build your space out for a great customer experience, for a more efficient throughput. And so those are some of the reasons. And I think maybe the last one, Dave, is that we talk about the financial thing. As businesses get more successful, and a lot of entrepreneurs, they tend to, their income goes up. Your tax advantages are phased out by the government, and we tend to spend more money, right? We buy nicer cars, maybe a boat, we take nicer vacations and all that. And, and we want to invest and all that, but wouldn't it be great to have this piece of real estate that you've got to pay somebody anyway to run, for your business to live, to pay yourself. And so that when you look back 15, 20 years, again, you haven't thought about it, 15, 20 years have passed, and now you've got this forced savings, forced investment program that was just dormant that you can do so many things with. Maybe it goes to your kids, passed to them in a stepped up, basis. They're not paying tax on that gain. There's just so many things that you could have if it makes sense. And the last thing I would say is you just owe it to yourself to go deeper and explore, to say, hey, could this make sense for me? And if so, now, or maybe sometime in the future, or maybe not. But you got to know that you can do it. It's available, and it's worth looking into.
That's awesome. I almost want to leave it right there, but I want to just follow up with, like, practice owners, like you said, they're going to be taxed. And it's like, I think, and maybe you can just shine some quick light on it. Like, a lot of practice owners are going to be like, hey, we got, whether it's hundreds of thousands, or if they're bigger practice, maybe they got $1 million or $2 million of net income, like EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA, and they're going to be taxed on that. And some practice owners will probably look at that and be like, I could get taxed, and then it goes to the IRS, it goes back to the government, or I could take some of that cash flow, some of those profits, and use that to step into some of these, to either buy your own building, or whether it's some other real estate transactions. Isn't that how a lot of folks kind of get into real estate, whether they're going to buy some other commercial real estate, or in this case, that makes the most business sense to buy your own building, obviously. Do you kind of talk to a lot of practice owners? Do they come to you with that sentiment? Like, hey, I'm going to get taxed anyway. Like, I'm basically going to, like, I might as well put this money into something that makes sense for my business, instead of, like, it goes back into the government and who knows how they're going to spend it. Yeah.
I mean, as you start becoming successful, that's your, the tax man's your fanboy, right? I mean, they're trying to get as much as they can, with your risk and your energy and your success. Yeah, I think we should all pay taxes, but there's a limit on what we should pay. And so yeah, that's why a lot of people come to us, not just for that, but other investment real estate. They're looking for ways to create passive income, to grow their income, and they're looking for vehicles. And there's some limitations on that from a tax standpoint, but anything that they can do to mitigate as much taxable income as they can, they are. And real estate can be a great, tool and mechanism for that.
Awesome. Guys, you're going to have to check out Amazon.com for Un-Lease Your Business. And by the way, so Paul, you sound super sharp. So unleash your business, unlock wealth, autonomy, and control by buying your building and firing your landlord. Is that something that you wrote? Because it almost sounds so good, like in some like design agency, someone, some copywriter wrote it for you. Is that something that you wrote, or is that something you had like a team help you, devise and draft up?
Well, I wrote it, but I bounced it off a lot of my friends, and I have a board of peers, business owners, and we'd try some things, and they would give me their feedback, and some of them just fell flat and whatnot. But just trying to communicate, sort of the message on what it can do. And I've got a website. I'll give it to them for free if they want to go there. It's ownyourbuildingnow.com. Just ownyourbuildingnow.com, and we'll print it and ship it to you. I think we charge $6 or $7 for that, just because we got to recover our costs. But yeah, again, grab it, sit down on a Saturday, check it out. And if the title is good, the rest of the book has to be good, right?
Absolutely. And like, so also this book, you obviously wrote it, I'm assuming, for some lead generation to help funnel for your services, right? So how does that help with lead generation or online credibility and social proof and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is to like get it out there for people that say, hey, I'm interested. We've got resources in here. If you order from us, obviously we get your contact information. We don't beat you up with a bunch of stuff though. But really it's so you identify that we're a source that we know what we're talking about, and that we can help you if this is something that you're, potentially in the market for. We don't want to help people that it's not in the market for. It doesn't do us any good, doesn't do them any good. It's a waste of everybody's time. So it helps to have an educated client that you might work with that understands the high levels, so then we can get deeper into their situation.
Awesome. Paul Neal, founder and CEO of Vantage Point Commercial Capital. You guys have been in the game for decades, helping practice owners, business owners towards this big step, this financial victory. What's a good place, whether it's email, LinkedIn, website again, what's a good place for the audience to reach out to you? You have the book on Amazon and elsewhere, and you just gave that URL, maybe give that again, but what's a good place for the audience to reach out to you if they want to learn more, or ideally use you guys on the consulting side and the financing side to go and take this big step?
Yeah, I would say just go to that website, ownyourbuildingnow.com. You can schedule an appointment right then. You can grab a copy of the book. We even have a little calculator. It's like a 2-minute assessment you can take for free to determine if buying a building might be right for you. It gives you a custom analysis. It's pretty cool. So that's really the best way. And then from there, you can find us.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much. This was awesome. I learned a ton. I know the audience will as well.
Yeah, you bet, Dave. I appreciate it. Had a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE@CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.